In 1590, a ship arrived at Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina. The governor, John White, had been gone for 3 years. He'd left behind 115 English colonists to start a new settlement, among them his own daughter and his 9-day-old granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English baby born in America. When White stepped onto the island, he found the settlement abandoned. Houses stood empty, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no goodbye letters, just silence. Then he found something carved into a wooden fence post. One word, CROATOAN, and carved into a nearby tree, CRO. That's it. That's all they left. For 400 years, this has been called America's greatest mystery. Where did 115 people go? How does an entire colony vanish without a trace? Documentaries, books, conspiracy theories, everyone obsessed with this question. But here's what nobody talks about. What if it was never a mystery at all? What if the colonists told John White exactly where they went, and he chose not to look? Croatoan wasn't a cryptic clue. It was a place, a specific island 50 miles south of Roanoke. White knew this. He'd been there before. He knew people there. So when he found that carving, he knew exactly what it meant. The colonists left him a forwarding address. So what did White do? He says he tried to sail to Croatoan. Once, twice. Both times, he claims, storms forced him to turn back. Then he gave up. He sailed back to England, moved to Ireland, and never tried again. Think about that. Your daughter, your infant granddaughter. You know where they are. You have the location carved in wood, and you try twice, then quit. But here's what makes this even stranger. England never sent anyone else. No rescue mission, no search party. The most powerful empire in the world just let 115 people disappear and called it unsolved. Why? Before White left Roanoke, he drew a map. An incredibly detailed watercolor map of the entire North Carolina coast. So accurate that when compared to modern satellite imagery, it's nearly perfect. And in 2012, researchers put that map under X-ray. They found something hidden underneath a small paper patch, a symbol. And when they used infrared light, they found traces of the same symbol drawn on top of the patch, suggesting invisible ink. John White hid something on his map. Then he marked it in code. Why would a man hide information about where his family went? Here's what I'm about to show you. The colonists didn't vanish. They left a note. They went exactly where they said they'd go. And we found them. Multiple times. We have evidence. We have artifacts. We have answers. But for 400 years, we've kept calling it a mystery. Because the real story isn't about disappearance. It's about abandonment. A governor abandoned his baby granddaughter. England let over 100 people die rather than admit failure. And America built a founding myth on top of a cover-up. This isn't the lost colony of Roanoke. This is a crime scene. Before we get to what happened, you need to understand who these people were. Because the story you learned in school, brave pioneers seeking adventure in the New World, is propaganda. The 115 colonists who landed on Roanoke Island in July 1587 weren't explorers. They weren't soldiers or seasoned adventurers. They were families. 17 women, 11 children. 87 men, most of them craftsmen, laborers, farmers, people looking for a fresh start because England had nothing left to offer them. This was England's sales pitch. Come to the New World. There's gold, fertile land, opportunity. You'll be rich. You'll own property. A new life awaits. They were selling the American dream before America even existed, and people bought it. But here's what England didn't tell them. Roanoke had already failed once. 2 years earlier, in 1585, England sent a group of colonists to the same island. Within a year, they came back starving, violent, and traumatized. The governor of that first colony, Ralph Lane, wasn't exactly a diplomat. When tensions rose with the local natives, Lane's solution was to kill their king, Wingina. Just walked up and executed him to prevent an uprising. So, by the time the 1587 colonists arrived, the local tribes already knew what English hospitality looked like, and it got worse. The colonists arrived during the worst drought the region had seen in 800 years. Tree ring data confirms it. Crops couldn't grow. Water sources dried up. The island was a death trap. On top of that, they arrived in July. Late. They were supposed to get there in spring to plant crops. By July, they'd missed the entire growing season. They were already behind. Within the first month, there were small attacks from nearby native tribes. Nothing massive, but enough to make it clear, you're not welcome here. And into this nightmare, on August 18th, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a baby girl, Virginia Dare. The first English child born in what would become America. Her name is now on counties, monuments, even wine bottles. She's a symbol, the first American. But in that moment, she was a 9-day-old baby born into a failing colony, surrounded by hostile neighbors on an island with no food. And her grandfather, John White, was the governor. He'd been in charge for exactly 1 month. 1 month. Then the colonists came to him with a desperate request. Go back to England. Get more supplies. Get more people. Get help. We can't survive here alone. White reportedly resisted. He didn't want to leave his daughter and newborn granddaughter. But the colonists insisted. They needed him to go. He was the governor. He had connections. He could get funding. So on August 25th, 1587, just 7 days after Virginia Dare was born, John White got on a ship and sailed back to England. He left behind 115 people, including his daughter, including his week-old granddaughter. He promised he'd be back soon, a few months maybe, just long enough to get supplies and reinforcements. It took 3 years. Now, here's where you have to ask yourself a question. What kind of man leaves his newborn granddaughter on a starving island surrounded by people who want them gone? Maybe a man who had no choice? A desperate governor trying to save his people? Or maybe a man who knew exactly what he was doing? Because when you look at what happened next, the delays, the excuses, the fake rescue attempts, you start to realize something. John White didn't lose his family. He abandoned them, and England led him. August 25th, 1587. John White sails away from Roanoke Island. His promise, I'll be back in a few months with supplies. He returns in August 1590, 3 years later. For centuries, historians have explained this delay with one word: Spain. The story goes like this. White tried to get back to Roanoke, but England was at war with Spain. The Spanish Armada was threatening invasion. Every available ship was needed for defense. White was stuck. He wanted to go back, but the war made it impossible. It's a clean explanation. Tragic, but understandable. War happens. Delays happen. He tried his best. Except when you actually look at the timeline, none of it makes sense. Let's break it down. White leaves? Roanoke, August 1587. The Spanish Armada conflict begins. May 1588. That's 9 months later. So what was White doing for those first 9 months? England wasn't at war yet. Ships were available. He could have turned around immediately, gathered supplies, and been back to Roanoke by spring 1588. He didn't. Okay, fine. Maybe he needed time to secure funding, gather supplies, recruit more colonists. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. The Spanish Armada attacks England July to August 1588. By September 1588, it's over. The Spanish fleet is destroyed. England wins. The threat is gone. The war lasted 2 months. White doesn't return to Roanoke until August 1590. That's 2 more years after the war ended. So let's do the math. White left in August 1587. The war delayed him for about 9 months, from May 1588 to early 1589, generously speaking. That means he should have been able to return by mid to late 1589. He didn't come back until August 1590. Oh, what was he doing for those extra 2 years? Here's what we know. In April 1588, before the Armada conflict even started, White did try to send a supply mission to Roanoke. 2 small ships. But according to the records, the crew decided to attack French ships instead, looking for loot. They got into a fight, failed, and turned back to England. White wasn't even on those ships. Then, in 1589, after the war ended, White tried again. He partnered with a merchant named William Sanderson to organize another relief voyage, and never left port. Why? The records don't say. Funding issues maybe, logistics, priorities, or maybe nobody actually cared. Because here's the thing. If you're a father and grandfather desperate to save your family, you get on a ship. Any ship. You beg. You bribe. You stow away if you have to. White had connections. He was a respected artist and cartographer. He'd worked with Sir Walter Raleigh, one of the most powerful men in England and the guy who funded Roanoke in the first place. If White really wanted to get back, he could have, but he didn't. In fact, while the colonists were starving on Roanoke, John White was living in Ireland. We know this because records show he eventually moved to a town called Cork and lived there comfortably until his death in 1593. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't desperately trying to mount rescue missions. Oh, he was fine. And here's where it gets even more suspicious. Recent research suggests that during these delay years, White may have been involved in other expeditions, not to Roanoke, to other parts of the Atlantic. There's evidence he was working on maps, doing surveys, possibly even traveling on other colonial ventures. In other words, he had access to ships. He had opportunities to sail. He just didn't sail to Roanoke. Now, let's talk about that final voyage in 1590, the one where he actually goes back. White doesn't organize this trip himself. He's not the captain. He doesn't own the ships. He's basically a passenger hitching a ride with a privateer named John Watts, who's running a pirate operation hunting Spanish vessels in the Caribbean. They agree to make a stop at Roanoke as a favor. A favor. Your daughter and infant granddaughter are stranded on an island, and you're waiting 3 years for someone to do you a favor. The fleet leaves England in March 1590. They spend months in the Caribbean, raiding ships, looking for treasure. Roanoke is an afterthought. They don't arrive at the island until August 1590, 3 years and 3 days after White left. When he gets there, everyone's gone. The word CROATOAN carved into a post, CRO carved into a tree. White says he knows what it means. CROATOAN Island, 50 miles south, that's where they went. So he tells the crew, we need to sail there. They try once. According to White's account, bad weather and rough seas force them to turn back. They try again the next day. Same thing. Storms. Dangerous conditions. So they give up. White writes that the ship's captain and crew refuse to make a third attempt. The ships are privately owned. They're not a rescue mission, they're privateers. They've already wasted time stopping at Roanoke, they're not risking their ships anymore, and White just accepts it. He sails back to England, never tries again, never organizes another voyage, never petitions the crown for help, never raises money for a search party. He moves to Ireland and disappears from the historical record. He dies 3 years later in 1593 without ever knowing, officially, what happened to his family. But here's the question you have to ask. Did he really not know? Because the more you look at John White's actions, the less it looks like a man desperately trying to save his family, and the more it looks like a man trying to avoid them. He had 3 years, multiple opportunities, access to ships and funding. And he took one half-hearted voyage with pirates who were doing him a favor. Then he quit. This wasn't delay. This was abandonment. And the evidence suggests he knew exactly what he was doing. August 1590. John White steps onto Roanoke Island after 3 years away. The settlement is abandoned, silent. He searches the houses, the buildings, the fort. No people, no bodies, no signs of violence. Then he finds it, carved into a wooden fence post at the entrance to the fort, CROATOAN, carved into a tree nearby, CRO. White later writes in his journal that seeing this gave him hope. He says he wasn't distressed. In fact, he claims he was relieved. Why? Here's what every documentary and history book glosses over. CROATOAN wasn't a mystery. It wasn't a cryptic clue or some ancient riddle. It was a place. A specific island about 50 miles south of Roanoke. And White knew exactly what it meant. Before White left in 1587, he'd made an agreement with the colonists. If they were forced to leave Roanoke Island for any reason, they would carve the name of their destination into a tree or post. And if they left under distress, if they were in danger, they would carve a Maltese cross next to the name. No cross was carved. That means they left willingly. They weren't attacked. They weren't kidnapped. They made a choice, carved the location, and left. And that location was CROATOAN. Now here's the part that makes this even clearer. The colonists had friends on CROATOAN Island. A man named Montejo. Montejo was a Native American from the CROATOAN tribe. He'd traveled to England twice, once in 1584 and again in 1586. He'd spent months with the English, learning their language, their customs. And in 1587, when White sailed back to Roanoke with the new colonists, Montejo came with them. He spent the entire voyage across the Atlantic with these people. He knew them. They trusted him. When Montejo returned to Roanoke, John White did something bizarre. He declared Montejo the chief of both the Roanoke and CROATOAN tribes, just announced it, as if a white English governor had the authority to crown a native king. Of course, Montejo had no actual power over the Roanoke tribe. He was only CROATOAN. So after tensions with the Roanoke tribe escalated, Montejo went back to CROATOAN Island with his people. And when the English colonists found themselves alone, starving and surrounded by hostile neighbors, who do you think they turned to? Montejo, the one person they knew, the one person who'd shown them kindness. So when White found CROATOAN carved into that post, it wasn't a mystery. It was his daughter saying, We went with Mateo. We're safe. Come find us. 50 miles south, CROATOAN Island, a specific place, a clear direction. So what does John White do? He tells the crew, we need to sail to CROATOAN. They prepare the ships. They're ready to go. Then, according to White's account, a storm rolls in. The seas get rough. The captain says it's too dangerous. They turn back. The next day, they try again. Another storm, more rough seas. The captain refuses to make a third attempt. The ships are privately owned. They're not risking it. And White writes in his journal that he's forced to abandon the search. Forced. He sails back to England, never tries again. Now, let's be clear about what just happened. White traveled 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean, survived weeks at sea, made it all the way to Roanoke Island, but he can't sail 50 miles south because of bad weather. 50 miles. In the 1500s, ships routinely traveled hundreds of miles along the coast. 50 miles is nothing. A day's journey, maybe 2. But 2 storms, 2, and he gives up? He doesn't wait for the weather to clear, doesn't try a different route, doesn't hire another ship when he gets back to England. He just quits. And here's the part that should make you furious. England never sent anyone else. No follow-up mission, no search party, no investigation. Sir Walter Raleigh, the man who funded the Roanoke colony, who had a fortune invested in it, he didn't send ships. The Crown didn't intervene. The families of the colonists back in England, some of them had resources, connections, they didn't organize a rescue. 115 people, gone. The most powerful empire in the world just moved on. Why? Because the note was clear. The colonists left. They told everyone where they went. And nobody wanted to read it. Because if they sailed to CROATOAN and found the colonists alive, integrated with a native tribe, it wouldn't be a tragedy. It would be a failure. England's New World colony didn't vanish mysteriously. It collapsed. The colonists abandoned the settlement and joined the natives. And that's not a story you tell investors. Dead colonists are a tragedy. Missing colonists are a mystery. But surviving colonists living with natives? That's an embarrassment. So they stopped looking and turned abandonment into legend. Let's go back to those carvings for a second, because there's something strange that most people miss. There weren't just one carving. There were 2. CROATOAN, carved into a fence post at the entrance to the fort. Clear, deliberate, complete. CRO, carved into a tree nearby. Short, unfinished. Why 2 carvings? If you're leaving a message, you carve it once. You make it clear. You don't leave 2 different versions of the same word in 2 different places, unless they're not the same message. Let's look at the details. CROATOAN was carved into a post that was part of the fort's palisade, the defensive fence around the settlement. It was at the entrance, public-facing, visible, the kind of place where you'd leave a message you wanted someone to find. It's also complete. 5 syllables, CROATOAN. Every letter there, no mistakes. Whoever carved it had time. They weren't rushing. Now look at CRO. 3 letters, carved into a tree, not at the entrance, not on the structure, just a tree somewhere in the settlement. It's either unfinished or it means something else entirely. All right, here's the theory nobody talks about. What if these carvings weren't made by the same people? What if they weren't even made at the same time? Think about it. CROATOAN is the message you carve when you're organized, when you've made a plan. We're leaving together. We're going to CROATOAN Island. If anyone comes looking, this is where we'll be. That's a group decision, a consensus. But CRO, that's the carving you make when you don't have time to finish. What if some of the colonists left for CROATOAN peacefully, deliberately, with Mateo and the CROATOAN tribe? They carved CROATOAN into the post before they left, clear directions. But what if others didn't go with them? What if a second group fled somewhere else, maybe inland, maybe to that hidden fort on John White's map, and they tried to leave their own message but didn't finish? Or what if CRO was carved later by someone who came back, someone who was trying to add to the message but got interrupted? We don't know. And here's the thing that should bother you. No one knows which carving was made first. When White found them in 1590, he didn't record which one he saw first. He didn't describe their condition, whether one looked older or more weathered than the other. He just wrote, I found CROATOAN on a post and CRO on a tree. That's it. So we have no idea if CRO was carved before CROATOAN, after it, or at the same time by a different person. And that changes everything. If CRO was carved first, maybe it was a warning. Maybe someone was trying to write CROATOAN but got interrupted. Maybe something happened, an attack, a sudden departure, and they couldn't finish. If CRO was carved after CROATOAN, maybe it was left by someone who came back, someone who survived, returned to the settlement, and tried to leave another clue. Or maybe CRO doesn't stand for CROATOAN at all. Maybe it's short for something else, a person's name, a direction, another location. We don't know. But here's what we do know. The existence of two carvings suggests the colonists didn't all leave together in one organized group. Something split them up. Maybe it was a disagreement. Some wanted to go with Monteo to CROATOAN, others didn't trust the natives and wanted to head inland. Maybe it was timing. Some left first, others stayed behind and left later. Or maybe something happened that forced them to scatter. Because here's the other detail that doesn't fit. White said there was no Maltese cross carved next to either message. Remember, that was the signal. If they left under distress, they'd carve a cross. No cross means they left willingly, but if they left willingly, in an organized way, why are there two different carvings? Why is one complete and one unfinished? Why didn't they just carve one clear message and leave? The answer is simple. Because this wasn't an organized evacuation. Something went wrong. Maybe not violently, maybe not catastrophically. But the colonists didn't leave Roanoke as one unified group with one clear plan. They split up, they scattered. Some went to CROATOAN. We'll find evidence of that. Some went somewhere else. We'll find evidence of that too. But the two carvings tell you everything you need to know. This was chaos, not mystery. Chaos. Now we need to talk about John White's map. Before White was a governor, he was an artist and cartographer, one of the best in England. Between 1585 and 1593, he created a detailed watercolor map of the North Carolina coast. It's called La Virginia Pars, and it's incredibly accurate. So accurate that when modern researchers compared it to satellite imagery, the only differences were natural changes to the coastline over 400 years. This wasn't some rough sketch. White knew this region better than almost anyone alive. The map shows Roanoke Island. It shows CROATOAN Island. It shows rivers, inlets, native settlements, everything. And for centuries, historians studied it as a historical artifact, a beautiful piece of cartography. Then, in 2012, a nonprofit called the First Colony Foundation asked the British Museum to take a closer look, because there were patches on the map, small paper squares glued over certain areas. Patches were common in the 1500s. If you made a mistake on a map that took months to create, you didn't start over. You just covered it up and redrew it. But the researchers wanted to know what was under these patches. So the British Museum used X-ray spectroscopy and infrared imaging, and under one of the small patches, they found something, a symbol, a four-pointed star, outlined in blue and filled in with red. According to the British Museum's report, this kind of symbol typically represented a fort or fortification. But here's where it gets strange. When they examined the patch more closely, they found faint markings on top of it. The same fort symbol, drawn again. Why would you hide a symbol under a patch, then redraw it on top of the patch? The British Museum's report offered one explanation. The lines on top could have faded over time, but then they proposed another possibility. Invisible ink. In the 1500s, you could make invisible ink using lemon juice or milk. You'd write with it, let it dry, and the writing would be invisible to the naked eye. To reveal it, you'd apply heat. It was a common technique for secret messages. So here's what may have happened. White drew a fort on his map. Then he covered it with a patch to hide it. Then he marked the same location again using invisible ink, visible only to someone who knew to look for it. Why? Theory 1. Spies. The English court was full of intrigue. Spain had spies. Rival factions had spies. If White was drawing a map that showed where English colonists were hiding, he might not want that information falling into the wrong hands, so he hid it. Theory 2. He was hiding the colonists from England itself. What if White didn't want the crown to know where the colonists went? What if this was a secret relocation and he was covering it up? Either way, the fort symbol was hidden for a reason. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The hidden fort on White's map is located about 50 miles inland from Roanoke Island, on the western side of Albemarle Sound. In the 2000s, archaeologists started excavating that exact area, and they found English artifacts. Surrey Hampshire borderware, a type of pottery made in England. This specific style was discontinued shortly after 1624, which puts it in the right time period for Roanoke colonists. Aglets, small copper tubes used to secure wool fibers. These were common in England before the early 1600s, but fell out of use after that. And the hilt of a rapier sword. Rapiers were expensive. This wasn't a common soldier's weapon. This was the kind of sword owned by a high-ranking Englishman, someone with status, the kind of person who would have been part of the Roanoke colony. Now here's the problem. Most of these artifacts date to the late 1500s and early 1600s. They can't be pinned to one exact year. So skeptics say, well, maybe these belong to later colonists, maybe Jamestown settlers, maybe traders. But the location matches, the timeline matches. And John White hid this spot on his map. He drew a fort, then he covered it up, then he marked it again in invisible ink. Why would you do that unless you knew people were there? White didn't lose his family. He knew exactly where they were. He drew them a map, then he hid it. So we have two carvings. We have a hidden map. We have theories. But here's what should end the mystery once and for all. We found them, not once, multiple times. Let's start with CROATOAN Island, now called Hatteras Island, the place the colonists literally told us they were going. In the 1990s and 2000s, archaeologists started excavating sites on Hatteras Island, specifically in an area called Cape Creek, where the CROATOAN tribe lived. And they found English artifacts, broken pieces of pottery, borderware from Surrey and Hampshire in England, the same type of ceramics English colonists would have brought with them in the late 1500s. A signet ring. English, gold, the kind worn by someone of status, part of an iron rapier hilt. Again, a weapon owned by a gentleman, not a common laborer. A writing slate, made from a type of stone used in England. And on it, barely visible, the letter M. Who was M? We don't know. Could have been Monteo, could have been one of the colonists, but someone was writing in English on CROATOAN Island. And aglets, those small copper tubes used to hold fabric together, the same kind found at the inland fort site on White's map. These weren't trade goods. Trade goods were mass-produced, generic. These were personal items, things colonists brought with them, things they used. So English people were living on CROATOAN Island in the late 1500s, exactly where the carving said they'd be. But it gets better. In 1888, almost 300 years after the colony disappeared, a group of 54 Native Americans from the CROATOAN tribe petitioned the United States Congress. They called themselves the Croatan Indians, and they asked for federal recognition and aid. In their petition, they made a very specific claim. We are the descendants of the lost Roanoke colony. Not, we heard stories about them. Not, we think maybe. They said, we are them. Congress sent investigators from the Ethnological Bureau to check it out. The investigators' report is fascinating. They wrote, it was thought that traces of white blood could be discovered among the Indians, some among them having gray eyes. Gray eyes. That's not a Native American trait, that's European. The report continued. It is probable that the greater number of the colonists were killed, but it was quite in keeping with Indian usages that a greater or less number, especially women and children, should have been made captive and subsequently incorporated into the tribe. In other words, yeah, it's entirely possible these people are descendants of the Roanoke colonists, but the federal government didn't grant them recognition, didn't follow up, just filed the report away and moved on. Why? Because if the lost colony wasn't actually lost, the story falls apart. Now let's fast forward to the 2000s. Modern DNA testing. Researchers started studying families on Hatteras Island who claimed descent from the CROATOAN tribe, and they found European genetic markers, specifically markers that trace back to the British Isles. And the timeline matches the late 1500s to early 1600s. Not from later settlers, not from Jamestown colonists who arrived in 1607, from earlier contact, from the Roanoke time frame. One researcher, or a man named Scott Dawson, has spent decades excavating Hatteras Island and studying the CROATOAN people. He's found over 1,000 artifacts, English and native mixed together, proving that Europeans and CROATOAN people were living side by side in the late 1500s. His conclusion? The Roanoke colonists went to CROATOAN. They integrated, they married into the tribes, they had children, and their descendants are still there. In 2020, archaeologists found even more evidence. A piece of a sword, English style, late 16th century. They found remnants of European-style buildings, construction techniques that didn't match native methods. They found it all in the same area where Monteo's people lived. So let's recap. The colonists carved CROATOAN into a post. CROATOAN was a real place. We excavated that place. All right, we found English artifacts from the 1580s to 1590s. We found Native Americans in 1888 claiming to be descendants of the colonists. We found DNA evidence backing that up. We found families on Hatteras Island today who carry European genetic markers from the late 1500s. We found them. We literally found them in the exact place they said they'd be. And yet, for over 400 years, we've kept calling it a mystery. Why? Because the truth doesn't fit the narrative. The colonists didn't vanish into thin air. They didn't get abducted by supernatural forces. They didn't mysteriously disappear. They did what desperate, starving people do when their government abandons them. They survived. They left their failing settlement. They joined the people who were willing to help them. They integrated into the CROATOAN tribe. They had families. They lived. But that story, colonists abandoning England's claim and joining Native Americans, that's not a founding myth. That's a failure. So England ignored the note, stopped looking, and let the story become a mystery. And America, centuries later, kept the mystery alive. Because a tragic disappearance is more romantic than the truth. Your government left you to die, so you survived without them. The lost colony of Roanoke was never lost. They told us exactly where they went. We just didn't want to listen. So if the evidence is this clear, if we've literally found the colonists and their descendants, why did England pretend they vanished? Why did John White stop looking? Why has this been called a mystery for 400 years? The answer is simple: money. Let's rewind and look at what England was dealing with in the 1580s. Roanoke wasn't England's first attempt at colonizing the New World. In 1585, they had already tried once. That first colony lasted less than a year. The governor, Ralph Lane, was a disaster. He had zero diplomatic skills. When tensions rose with the local Roanoke tribe, his solution was violence. He didn't negotiate. He didn't try to make peace. He killed their king, a man named Wingina, leader of the Roanoke tribe. Lane just executed him to prevent an uprising. Predictably, that made things worse. The colonists ran out of food. They couldn't grow crops. The natives stopped trading with them. They were starving, paranoid, and surrounded by people who now hated them. When Sir Francis Drake showed up in 1586 and offered to take them back to England, they didn't hesitate. They abandoned the colony and sailed home. So when they arrived back in England, skinny, traumatized, and defeated, it was an embarrassment. England had spent a fortune on this colony. They'd promised investors that the New World was full of riches, gold, resources, trade opportunities. Instead, they came back with nothing. But the man funding Roanoke, Sir Walter Raleigh, wasn't ready to give up. Raleigh was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England, a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I. And he'd invested heavily in the Roanoke project. He couldn't afford for it to fail. So in 1587, he tried again. New colonists, new governor, John White. A fresh start. And this time, Raleigh made promises. He sold this colony to investors as a guaranteed return. He told them the New World had fertile land, friendly natives, and resources waiting to be exploited. He lied. Because Raleigh knew what the first colony had found: hostile locals, terrible farming conditions, and no gold. But he needed the money. So he sold the fantasy. And over 100 people, families, workers, craftsmen, bought in. They paid for their passage. They invested their life savings. Some were promised land ownership in the New World. This wasn't a royal expedition. This was a private venture, Raleigh's venture. When those colonists arrived on Roanoke Island in July 1587, they found exactly what the first group found: a drought-stricken island, hostile neighbors, and no resources. Within a month, they were begging John White to go back to England and get help. White left. He promised to return quickly. But when he got back to England, he found a problem: Spain. In 1588, the Spanish Armada launched an attack on England. Every available ship was mobilized for defense. The war drained England's resources: money, supplies, manpower. Raleigh's colonial project became a low priority. And here's the key thing. By the time the war ended in late 1588, Raleigh had a choice. He could fund another expedition to Roanoke, rescue the colonists, bring them back, or he could cut his losses. Because here's the reality. If Raleigh sent ships to Roanoke and found the colonists alive but starving, integrated with natives, or worse, having abandoned the settlement entirely, it would prove the colony failed. And if the colony failed, investors would demand their money back. Raleigh would be ruined, his reputation destroyed. But if the colonists mysteriously vanished, that's not a failure, that's a tragedy. You can't blame Raleigh for a mysterious disappearance. And you can't demand refunds for an act of God or an unexplained disaster. Dead colonists, or missing colonists, are worth more than failed colonists. So Raleigh stopped funding rescue missions. He let John White make one half-hearted attempt in 1590, hitching a ride with privateers who didn't care about Roanoke. And when White came back and said, "They carved CROATOAN, but we couldn't get there because of storms," Raleigh didn't push for a follow-up mission. He let it go. He let 115 people disappear from the record, and he moved on. Now here's where it gets even darker. In 1603, Queen Elizabeth I died. King James I took the throne, and one of his first moves was to investigate Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh was arrested in 1603 on charges of treason. The accusation? Plotting against the king? But many historians believe the real reason was financial. Raleigh had made massive promises about the wealth of the New World. He'd taken money from investors, from the crown, from powerful people, and he had nothing to show for it. Roanoke failed. His other ventures failed. He lied about colonial prospects to secure funding, and now people wanted answers. Raleigh was imprisoned in the Tower of London for 13 years. In 1616, he was released temporarily to lead one final expedition to South America, where he'd promised there was gold. There wasn't. The expedition failed. Men died. And when Raleigh returned to England in 1618, King James had him executed, officially for treason. But the timing is suspicious. Raleigh's entire legacy was built on colonial promises he couldn't keep. He'd sold investors on a new world that didn't exist. And the lost colony of Roanoke, the colonists who mysteriously vanished, was part of that scam. If those colonists had been found alive, integrated with natives, Raleigh's lie would have been exposed decades earlier. But because they were lost, the failure could be blamed on mystery instead of mismanagement. So England let the story become a legend. No follow-up expeditions, no investigations, just silence. And over the centuries, that silence turned into myth, the lost colony, the greatest mystery in American history. But it was never a mystery, it was a cover-up. England abandoned over 100 people because bringing them home would have exposed the lie. Raleigh abandoned them because admitting failure would have cost him everything. And John White, whether he was complicit or just a coward, stopped looking because facing the truth meant admitting he left his family to die. Dead colonists are a tragedy. Failed colonists are a scandal. So they chose tragedy. And we've been calling it a mystery ever since, so England covered it up to save money and reputation. But that was the 1590s. Why are we still calling it a mystery in 2026? Because America needed the cover-up to become something bigger. And they found the perfect symbol, a baby. Let's talk about Virginia Dare. Born August 18, 1587, 9 days before her grandfather abandoned her on Roanoke Island. She was the first English child born in what would become America, and by age 3, she was gone. We don't know how she died. We don't know when. We don't even know if she made it to CROATOAN Island with the others or if she died on Roanoke. But here's what we do know. Her name is everywhere. Dare County, North Carolina, named after her. Virginia Dare Memorial Bridge, Virginia Dare Trail. There's a wine brand called Virginia Dare, marketed as America's oldest wine brand, founded in 1835. There are statues of her, memorials. She's been the subject of poems, plays, novels. In the early 1900s, she became a symbol, the first American, the innocent child of the New World. And people built an entire mythology around her. Some legends say she didn't die, that she was raised by the CROATOAN tribe and became a beautiful young woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. One version of the story claims a native shaman fell in love with her, and when she rejected him, he turned her into a white deer. A white deer, blessed by the spirits, roaming the forests of North Carolina forever. It's a beautiful story. It's also complete fiction. The reality is far uglier. Virginia Dare was born into a failing colony during the worst drought in 800 years. Her grandfather left when she was 9 days old. By the time he came back 3 years later, she was gone. If she survived at all, she probably lived in starvation conditions. Maybe she made it to CROATOAN Island. Maybe she grew up integrated into the tribe. Or maybe she died as an infant, disease, malnutrition, dehydration. Babies died all the time in the 1500s, especially in harsh conditions. But America didn't want that story. America wanted a symbol. So in the 1800s and early 1900s, as the United States was building its national identity, Virginia Dare became a myth. She represented American exceptionalism, the idea that English settlers were destined to thrive in the New World, that colonialism was noble and pure. She was white, innocent, and tragic, the perfect martyr. And the mystery of her disappearance made her even more powerful. If we'd found her remains, if we'd confirmed she died of disease or starvation, she'd just be another dead colonist. But because she vanished, she could be anything: a legend, a ghost, a symbol of manifest destiny. And that's exactly what she became. In the early 20th century, white supremacist groups latched onto Virginia Dare's propaganda. They used her image to promote the idea of white settlers as victims, innocent people destroyed by the savage wilderness. They ignored the fact that the colonists were abandoned by their own government. They ignored the fact that the CROATOAN tribe likely saved the survivors. They turned a baby who probably died of neglect into a nationalist symbol. And here's the most disturbing part. Roanoke had to stay a mystery for this to work. If the colonists were found alive, integrated with native tribes, it would destroy the myth, because Virginia Dare wouldn't be a tragic symbol of colonial innocence. She'd be proof that English settlers needed Native Americans to survive. She'd be evidence that the colony failed, that England abandoned its people, and that the only reason anyone survived was because they gave up on England and joined the CROATOAN. That story doesn't sell. That story doesn't inspire manifest destiny or American exceptionalism. So the mystery had to stay unsolved. The colonists had to remain lost, and Virginia Dare had to stay a ghost, because the truth that she was either dead from her own government's neglect or alive because natives saved her destroys the entire founding myth. We didn't build memorials to Virginia Dare because we cared about her. We built them because we needed her to be a mystery. We needed Roanoke to be unsolvable. Because the solved version, colonists abandoned by England, saved by natives, absorbed into tribes, doesn't fit the story America wanted to tell about itself. So we turned a dead baby into propaganda, and we called it history. Let's put all the pieces together. August 1587, 115 colonists land on Roanoke Island. 1 month later, their governor leaves them there and sails back to England. 3 years later, he returns. They're gone. They carved a note: CROATOAN, a clear message, a specific location, 50 miles south. John White says he tried to get there twice. Storms stopped him, then he quit. But before he left Roanoke the first time, a white drew a map, an incredibly detailed map of the entire region, and on that map, he hid a symbol, a fort 50 miles inland. He covered it with a patch, then marked it again in invisible ink. Why? Because he knew where the colonists were going. He knew some would go to CROATOAN with Monteo. He knew others might go inland to safer territory. He drew the map so someone could find them, then he hid it. England never sent a rescue mission. No follow-up expedition, no search party. Sir Walter Raleigh, the man who funded the colony, let them disappear. And in the centuries since, we've called it America's greatest mystery. But it was never a mystery. We found them. Archaeologists have excavated Hatteras Island, formerly CROATOAN Island. They found English artifacts from the 1580s and 1590s. Pottery, weapon parts, writing slates, personal items. In 1888, descendants of the CROATOAN tribe told Congress, "We are the remnants of the lost colony." Modern DNA testing confirms it. Families on Hatteras Island carry European genetic markers that trace back to the late 1500s. Some of the colonists went to CROATOAN. They integrated with Monteo's people. They survived. Archaeologists have also excavated the site of the hidden fort on White's map, 50 miles inland from Roanoke. They found English artifacts there too, the same time frame, the same types of objects. Some of the colonists went inland. They settled at that fort. They survived. The two carvings, CROATOAN and CRO, make sense now. The colonists split up. Some went south to CROATOAN Island. Some went inland to the hidden fort. They told us where they went. They carved it in wood. They left a trail of artifacts. John White knew. He drew a map showing both locations. Then he hid it. Why? Because if England found them alive, integrated with native tribes, it would expose the lie. The colony didn't fail because of mysterious forces. It failed because England sent desperate people to a hostile environment during a drought, promised them support, then abandoned them. And the colonists survived by doing the one thing England didn't want them to do. They joined the natives. That's not a tragedy, that's a failure. So England let the story become a mystery, and America, centuries later, kept it a mystery. Because they were abandoned by their own country doesn't fit the origin story we wanted. We needed Roanoke to be unsolved. We needed it to be mysterious and tragic. Because the truth is ugly. The truth is that over 100 people were left to die because it was cheaper and easier than admitting failure. The truth is that a governor abandoned his infant granddaughter to save his reputation. The truth is that the only reason any of them survived is because the people England called savages took them in. And that truth destroys the myth. So we built statues to Virginia Dare. We named counties after her, and we turned her into a symbol of American perseverance. We wrote poems about the lost colony. We made documentaries. We called it the greatest mystery in American history. But it was never a mystery. It was a cover-up. And here's the part that should make you furious. We still do this. How many people has the government abandoned while calling it a mystery? How many disappearances are just bureaucratic failures rebranded as tragedies? Roanoke set the template. When people become inconvenient, you don't save them. You let them disappear. Then you call it unsolved. You build myths around them. You make them symbols. You turn abandonment into legend. The colonists of Roanoke were expendable, and when they did exactly what they said they'd do, left a note, relocated, survived, England chose not to look. Not because they couldn't find them, because they didn't want to. Roanoke wasn't the first lost colony. It was the first time we chose to forget. And we've been choosing to forget ever since. The real horror of Roanoke isn't that 115 people vanished. It's that they didn't vanish at all, and we spent 400 years pretending they did. We have the answers. The colonists left a note, CROATOAN. They told us where they went. We found their artifacts on CROATOAN Island, pottery, tools, personal items from the 1580s. We found their artifacts at the inland fort, the one John White hid on his map. We found their descendants, people living on Hatteras Island today who carry DNA from European settlers in the late 1500s. We found them, multiple times, in exactly the places they said they'd be. But we kept calling it a mystery. Why? Because the truth doesn't fit the story we wanted to tell about ourselves. The truth is that England abandoned over 100 people to save money and reputation. The truth is that a governor left his baby granddaughter on a starving island and never came back. The truth is that the colonists survived only because they gave up on England and joined the people England called savages. Now, that's not a founding myth. That's a failure. So we turned it into a mystery instead. We built monuments. We wrote legends. And we made Virginia Dare a symbol of American innocence instead of what she actually was, a victim of colonial neglect. And for 400 years, we've acted like the answer is unknowable, but it's not. The answer has always been there, carved into wood, buried in the soil, written in DNA. And we just chose not to look. And that should terrify you, because if we did this with Roanoke, what else are we doing it with? How many other mysteries are just cover-ups we've agreed not to solve? How many missing people, unexplained disasters, unsolved cases are really just inconvenient truths that someone decided to bury? Roanoke taught us something dangerous, that you can abandon people, call it a mystery, and the world will move on. You don't need to hide the evidence. You don't need to destroy the records. You just need to stop looking. And eventually, people will forget that there was ever anything to find. That's what happened to the Roanoke colonists. They left a forwarding address, they survived, they integrated, they built lives. And England said, let's call it unsolved. America said, let's build a myth. And a historian said, let's keep debating. Because solving it would mean admitting the ugly truth. They were expendable, every single one of them. The families who sold everything they had for a fresh start. The workers who believed the promises of riches and land. Eleanor Dare, who gave birth on a failing island and watched her father sail away. Virginia Dare, born August 18th, 1587. 9 days old when her grandfather abandoned her, the first English baby born in America, and the first person America abandoned. She never got to grow up in the country that would use her name to sell wine and build monuments. She either died of starvation on Roanoke, or she grew up Croatoan, raised by the people her own country refused to thank for saving her. Either way, America turned her into a symbol while ignoring what she actually represented. A government that will leave you to die, then call your death a mystery. That's the real story of Roanoke. Not disappearance, not aliens, not supernatural forces, just abandonment. Deliberate, calculated abandonment, and a 400-year agreement to call it something else. But now you know. The the colonists, didn't vanish. They left a note. They went exactly where they said they'd go. John White knew where they were. He drew a map. Then he hid it. England knew they could find them. They chose not to look, and America knew the truth. We just decided the lie was better. So the next time someone tells you Roanoke is the greatest mystery in American history, you can tell them the truth. Roanoke isn't unsolved. We just never wanted to solve it. Because the answer, 115 people abandoned by their own country, saved by the people we're taught to fear, doesn't fit the story we tell ourselves about who we are. But maybe it should. Maybe we should remember Virginia Dare, not as a symbol of American perseverance, but as a reminder of what happens when governments decide people are expendable. Maybe we should remember Roanoke not as a mystery, but as a warning, that the most dangerous disappearances aren't the ones we can't solve. They're the ones we choose not to. The lost colony of Roanoke was never lost. It was abandoned, and then forgotten, on purpose. And here's what keeps me up at night. Somewhere in the 1590s, a child on CROATOAN Island, maybe 5, maybe 6 years old, asked her CROATOAN mother a question. Why did grandfather never come back for us? And that mother had to explain that he did come back. He sailed right past them, 50 miles away, close enough to reach in a day. But he turned around, not because he couldn't find them, because finding them would have been inconvenient. That child might have been Virginia Dare. We'll never know. Oh, but what we do know is this. She grew up knowing her own blood chose to forget her. And 400 years later, we're still telling ourselves it was a mystery. Still calling it unsolved instead of what it really was. Abandonment. The lost colony of Roanoke didn't vanish. They left a note. They told us exactly where they'd be. We found them. Multiple times. But we keep calling it the greatest mystery in American history. Not because we don't know the answer, because we don't like it.